Recall that person, the one who evokes in you not just mild dislike, but an almost physical revulsion, a burning, irrational rejection. Perhaps it's a colleague whose ostentatious ambition seems disgustingly vulgar and whose feigned confidence appears as a mask for profound emptiness. Or that spiritual guru whose cloying, saccharine enlightenment rings false, making you wince at their insincerity, sensing something cold and calculating beneath the veneer of piety. Or maybe it's just someone whose untamed, almost animalistic aggression seems to have no justification, yet somehow hooks you more than it should, causing an internal tremor and a desire to turn away, as if pushing away a mirror. Something in them, in these external manifestations, irritates you to your core, as if they've pressed an invisible but highly sensitive button within you, exposing a nerve you never knew existed. This irrational, at times almost painful, reaction is no accident, is not merely an assessment of another's flaws, nor a cold analysis of shortcomings. Rather, it is an echo, a distorted reflection of what lives within you, but has been rejected, exiled from your conscious awareness. Imagine for a moment how scandalous this thought is, how capable it is of overturning your usual worldview, the one you so desperately reject, who evokes a storm of negative emotions in you, is in fact an unwitting messenger, a phantom of your own banished shadow. Yes, it's true. What infuriates you in others is often either an exaggerated or distorted reflection of qualities and potentials you once forbade yourself, locking them away in the darkest, dustiest corners of your psyche. These are not merely someone else's flaws. This is your own unacknowledged power projected onto the world and returning to you as revulsion. It is a fragment of your own unfinished story, manifesting in someone else's drama. It is at this point of burning irritation, in this aversion to a seemingly alien essence, that a paradoxical yet potent key to your inner strength is hidden. This is not just discomfort, nor an annoying obstacle on the path to tranquility. It is a pointer to unused resources, to suppressed talents, to those aspects of your personality that could enrich you, make you whole and powerful, but instead fester in oblivion, projecting onto the world and generating only internal conflict. It is a beacon pointing to a treasure trove whose entrance is buried under the debris of old beliefs and fears. And the stronger the aversion, the more energy and potential is hidden behind that veil. But why does this mechanism work so flawlessly? To understand this, we need to return to the scene of the very first transgression. We've spoken of burning aversion, of projection, of how something external reflects something exiled from within. But before we can enter into dialogue with this shadow entity, this invisible double, it's essential to understand where and when the initial banishment occurred. Where did this internal amputation come from? This unspoken verdict against qualities that could have been your true strength. Recall that vague yet deeply ingrained moment when the world first signaled to you, being yourself is dangerous. Perhaps it happened in early childhood when your spontaneous expression of healthy aggression, a natural desire to assert your boundaries, was met with a harsh reprimand. You can't behave like that. Be good. And so the seed of natural assertiveness necessary for breakthroughs, for asserting yourself in this world, was hastily tucked into the shadow, labeled as bad, ill-mannered. Or perhaps it happened when, consumed by fiery ambition, you dared to dream of something greater than those around you, and in response received a condescending smile or a biting remark. Don't get ahead of yourself. Show off. Loser. In that moment, your healthy hunger for achievement, the engine of progress and personal growth, was pushed into the hidden corners of your soul, transforming into shame for your own greatness, into fear of being judged for wanting to excel. And what about the right to make mistakes? How often were you taught that perfection was the only acceptable standard? Any blunder, any imperfection was perceived as a catastrophe, a stigma, proof of your inadequacy. The moment the fear of not being perfect became stronger than the desire for knowledge, your capacity for risk, for experimentation, for true learning, was locked away in the prison of the shadow. You learned to avoid mistakes at the cost of abandoning life. Think about your vulnerability. When were you forbidden to cry? When were your tears ridiculed? When were you taught to be strong at all costs? In those minutes when sensitivity, empathy, and the capacity for deep connection were declared weaknesses, you hid your tenderness, your vulnerability, your true humanity. Now they reside in the shadow, projected onto those whose openness triggers your irrational irritation. And finally, the ability to confront, not destructively, but in a way that clarifies, sets boundaries, protects yourself. When was this skill suppressed under the pressure of non-confrontation, peacefulness, convenience for others? When did you learn to avoid direct dialogue, to swallow grievances so as not to rock the boat? In that moment, your inner strength, your capacity for honest communication and self-protection went underground, ready to explode at the most inopportune moment or manifest as passive aggression. These moments, these subtle yet fateful lessons, shaped the part of you that now lives in exile. They created an invisible boundary behind which remained your genuine ambitions, your healthy aggression, your right to imperfection, your vulnerability, and your capacity for direct confrontation. This is not just a personal story, but part of a deep archetypal process familiar to anyone who has ever tried to fit into someone else's mold. The disquiet you feel, that visceral recoil from what appears vulgar, aggressively self-serving, or excessively fragile in another, is rarely a mere judgment of external flaw. More often than not, it is the resonant echo of an internal exile, a haunting reverberation from the deepest chambers of your own psyche. Think of the shadow not merely as a dusty attic where we stash our perceived vices, but as a vibrant, living archive of banished potentials, a repository of instincts and qualities deemed unacceptable by the shaping forces of our early world. Each trait, be it a surging, unapologetic ambition, a fierce, protective anger that knows no compromise, a raw, tender vulnerability, or an unbridled joy, if met with condemnation or fear, was not merely suppressed. It was, in a profound psychological sense, cast out from the tribe of your conscious self. A part of you, vital and authentic, was declared persona non grata, banished beyond the pale of acceptable identity. This internal banishment is no passive act of forgetting. It is an ongoing, energetic disavowal, a constant act of severing and pushing away parts of what you inherently are. And like any entity denied its rightful place, these exiled aspects do not simply vanish into the ether. They linger, they coalesce, they gather a formidable, unacknowledged force, and they demand recognition. They become, in effect, the energy of an unpaid bill, accruing interest in the form of irrational anxieties, explosive outbursts, or chronic low-level irritation. The universe, in its relentless pursuit of balance, will inevitably present these disowned fragments back to you, often in the most jarring and uncomfortable forms imaginable, projected onto the very people whose mere presence ignites your deepest, most inexplicable aversion. This is why the perceived flaws of others can feel so disproportionately offensive, so personally affronting. They are, in truth, the messengers of your own neglected truths. Consider the ancient Greek practice of the pharmakos, a designated individual, often an outcast, a criminal, or even a person chosen at random, upon whom the community's accumulated sins, misfortunes, and impurities were symbolically loaded. This human scapegoat was then ritually expelled, or in some cases, sacrificed, in the belief that their banishment would purify the polis, cleansing it of its collective ills. This seemingly archaic ritual serves as a stark, visceral metaphor for the mechanism of psychological projection, a universal human tendency that transcends millennia. We too, in our modern, seemingly enlightened lives, unconsciously seek our own pharmakos in the external world. We identify figures, groups, or even specific traits in others onto whom we can unwittingly heap our own disavowed anxieties, our unacknowledged aggressions, our secret fears of inadequacy, or our suppressed desires for excess. We see them, these externalized shadows, and condemn them with a vehemence that often betrays the intensity of the internal battle we refuse to wage. The more vehemently we repudiate a quality in another, the more we label it as unacceptable, disgusting, or wrong. The more likely it is that this very quality in some form resides unexamined, unintegrated, and unacknowledged within our own psychic landscape, patiently awaiting its moment of demanding integration. It is a mirror held up by the world, reflecting what we have chosen not to see within ourselves. The question then becomes not if these reflections will appear, but which particular distortions of your own unowned power will most acutely capture your gaze. The world, like a silent mirror, continues to reflect back to us what we are unwilling to see within ourselves, and so we stand before it as if before a gallery of whimsical portraits, each a distorted echo of our own exiled shadow. This is not merely discomfort. It is an irrational, sometimes burning aversion that flares up at the sight of certain human types. They are our pharmakos, but no longer those to whom we symbolically transfer sins, but those who unwittingly carry our rejected qualities, forcing us to confront them face to face. What images provoke this internal rebellion, this silent scream of disgust within us? Most often it's those who embody qualities we were forced to suppress to survive or be accepted. Take, for example, the tyrant. Not necessarily a despot on a throne, but a person who seems overly assertive, domineering, or brash. They might be someone who shamelessly interrupts, appropriates others' ideas, takes up too much space, or dictates terms without regard for others' opinions. In their self-assured gait, their sharp tone of voice, their eyes that know no doubt, we perceive something that instantly triggers irrational disdain or anger. Why? Because in them we see a distorted, exaggerated version of that healthy aggression, that ability to assert our boundaries and desires, that right to our own self that we once buried deep within. They are a walking reminder of our own indecisiveness, of moments when we stayed silent, when we should have shouted, when we retreated instead of fighting. Or consider the eternal victim. This archetype manifests in those who are demonstrably weak, who constantly complain about the world's unfairness, who avoid responsibility by shifting it onto others, who seem to wallow in their suffering, demanding endless sympathy and attention. Their endless laments, their helpless gestures, their inability to take life into their own hands evoke an equally strong but different kind of irritation. This can be a mix of disgust, anger, a desire to shake them, but most often a deep-seated aversion. In them, we see the part of ourselves that was once helpless, vulnerable, that needed protection and care, but whose needs were rejected or ridiculed. We forbade ourselves to be weak, to be imperfect, to be dependent, and now the sight of these qualities in others triggers an uncontrollable reaction in us. Allow me to tell you about Martha. Martha was a successful executive, a brilliant strategist, yet she had a panic-stricken fear of conflicts. Whenever Oleg, a colleague, aggressively pushed his ideas in meetings, interrupted speakers, and claimed shared achievements, Martha was overwhelmed by a wave of irrational hatred. She felt something dark, uncontrollable boiling within her. Her hands clenched under the table, and her heart pounded as if trying to escape her chest. Oleg was not a monster. He was simply very assertive. But for Martha, he was the embodiment of everything she had suppressed: the right to anger, to assert her positions, to healthy competition. One day, during one of Oleg's particularly furious presentations, Martha felt not just irritation, but an almost physical nausea. In that moment, when Oleg, without batting an eye, presented her idea as his own, Martha saw not only his brashness, but also her own voicelessness, her willingness to retreat to avoid confrontation. Her hatred for Oleg was not so much for him, but for the part of herself that allowed him to act that way, the part that denied her the right to a voice, to victory. It is in such moments when we encounter these external demons that the world offers us an invaluable key to our inner treasure. Behind the veil of this irrational aversion, behind the shadow's sly laughter, lies not just emptiness or vice, but something far more valuable, something we once lost or consciously exiled from our lives. We spoke of phantoms lurking on the periphery of consciousness, of those distorted reflections that only return ugly versions of ourselves. The shadows we hide in the depths of our soul are projected onto the world, coloring it with the hues of our non-acceptance. But behind every such demon, every image that evokes repulsion, lies not a distortion, but a potential, a gift locked away in the prison of our aversion. Take the one we labeled the tyrant, be it a boss, colleague, or parent whose assertiveness seemed aggressive, whose determination despotic. In their repulsive projection, we see our own exiled capacity for healthy aggression. Not destructive rage, but that primal energy that allows us to assert our boundaries, protect our rights, pave the way to our goals. We denied ourselves the right to this inner strength, to a direct no, to constructive confrontation. In childhood, any display of will might have been met with condemnation, any disagreement, punishment. We learned to be convenient, suppressing the leader, strategist, and protector within ourselves. Or consider the eternal victim, a character whose seeming helplessness and passivity provoke irritation bordering on contempt. In this projection, in this painful reflection, lies our own deeply hidden vulnerability, the capacity for true compassion for others and for ourselves, the right to imperfection, to make mistakes, to be weak, to ask for help without humiliation. We exiled this quality because being vulnerable seemed dangerous, acknowledging limitations, shameful. We built a fortress of false strength, denying ourselves the right to humanity, to accept our own wounds, to that depth of empathy that only arises from contact with our own pain. Even in the show-off, sloppy, or irresponsible person, there may lie a prohibition on the right to be imperfect, on freedom from paralyzing perfectionism, on the ability to learn from mistakes without fear of judgment. Each of these phantoms is a message encrypted in our aversion. It is a pointer to a valuable capacity, an inherent right that we, fearing to resemble demons, took away from ourselves. It is the foundation of our self-sufficiency, a genuine strength awaiting liberation. But what happens when this fear, this internal taboo, begins to dictate terms, even in the process of approaching these hidden aspects? This internal censorship can influence the very attempt to initiate dialogue with what we have long rejected. We spoke of the shadow as an invisible double whose traits we recognize with horror in others, projecting onto them what we don't want to see in ourselves. But what is the cost of this rejection when it comes to the first, most timid step towards dialogue with one's own darkness? This cost is not just fleeting discomfort, but chronic self-sabotage, a sophisticated avoidance of the path to wholeness, disguised as rational decisions. Imagine a person who has spent their entire life avoiding conflicts, suppressing anger, just to avoid resembling the tyrant who once hurt them. When asked to keep a journal to explore their suppressed emotions, they write about anything, the weather, dinner plans, but never about the boiling rage seething beneath the surface. The fear of becoming that monster, losing control, transforming into what they hate, becomes an invisible censor of their soul. They are afraid to even name this feeling, let alone look it in the eye. Such superficial journaling, this dance around true pain, not only fails to bring relief, but also reinforces the internal wall, depriving the person of the opportunity to understand the source of their chronic fatigue or sudden bursts of irritation directed at those who least deserve it. True dialogue never begins, and suppressed aggression merely finds detours. Or consider someone who has spent their entire life fleeing their vulnerability, fearing to become the eternal victim they so despise. They are offered active imagination, an immersion into a world of symbols and inner images to confront their fears and pain, but their imagination freezes at the threshold of dark corridors. They see only the scenery, but dare not step deeper. This is too hard, an inner voice whispers. I don't want to feel weak and helpless again. They turn away from their inner weeping children, despairing of finding strength in them, and continue to build walls around themselves that ultimately doom them to loneliness. Refusal of this confrontation does not make them stronger. It merely deprives them of access to a deep source of compassion, both for themselves and others, and prevents the formation of genuine intimacy, leaving them isolated despite an outward display of strength. And finally, the classic empty chair technique, where the empty seat opposite becomes a mirror for the rejected part. How often does a person faced with the need to speak aloud with their dark side, with the envy, greed, cruelty they despise, suddenly find 1,000 reasons to avoid it? This is silly, they'll say. I feel like an idiot. In reality, it's not foolishness, but a panicked terror of being caught red-handed with their demon. Such a refusal is not just a missed opportunity. It is an active self-imprisonment in ignorance, a voluntary deprivation of power that could be directed towards healthy ambition, asserting one's rights, the ability to fight for one's ideals instead of manifesting in a distorted, uncontrolled form. Here lies the most subtle objection, the whisper of doubt that creeps into consciousness. But what if, by opening this door, I truly unleash a monster? What if I become like those I despise? This is a natural, almost instinctive fear. However, this very fear is the chain that holds you captive. Shadow integration is not an invitation to chaos, not a license for the unconscious expression of the darkest impulses. Rather, it is a process of conscious awareness. It is a gaze into the abyss, to understand that the abyss is not you, but merely a part of your potential that has been rejected. By refusing dialogue, you don't get rid of the shadow. You merely allow it to operate from behind the scenes, unconsciously influencing your decisions, distorting your perception of the world, and depriving you of access to colossal inner strength. True freedom begins not with banishment, but with recognition and assimilation. You don't become a tyrant by acknowledging your healthy aggression. You become a person capable of asserting your boundaries. You don't become a victim by accepting your vulnerability. You become a person capable of deep empathy and genuine intimacy. This process, however daunting it may seem, opens the doors to true self-knowledge. It releases energy that was previously spent on suppression and projection. But if we so stubbornly resist what repels us in others, what happens to what evokes our boundless admiration, our almost irrational urge to imitate? Does not another key to our own untapped possibilities lie there behind the gleam of the ideal? If the irrational aversion we discussed earlier serves as a distorted mirror reflecting our rejected qualities, there exists another, far more subtle and insidious mechanism of projection. It manifests not in repulsion, but in pure, sometimes almost sacred, admiration. We speak of the golden shadow, those of our own unrevealed or unconscious talents, abilities, and strengths that we, like precious gifts, bestow upon others, placing them on a pedestal. Imagine you meet someone whose inner work seems to you an epitome. They possess incredible empathy or fearlessness in confronting inner demons, or astonishing clarity of thought, or the capacity for deep self-reflection. You admire them, read their books, listen to their lectures, strive to emulate their path. There's nothing wrong with that, you might say, and you'd be partly right. The true danger of the golden shadow lies in the fact that by projecting these qualities onto another, we deprive ourselves of the opportunity to recognize them within ourselves. We turn them into an unattainable ideal instead of seeing in them the seeds of our own potential. It's as if an artist admiring someone else's masterpiece forgot their own palette and brushes, convincing themselves that only another can create something so grand. We give away our crown, our scepter, our inner power to the external world, leaving ourselves in the role of eternal spectator, not the creator of our own life. This act of giving, sometimes unconscious, is one of the most sophisticated forms of self-sabotage. It creates an invisible wall between you and your own inner treasure trove. You strive for integration, for wholeness, yet voluntarily sever yourself from the very aspects that could lead you to the desired depth. Your energy, your potential, your unique capacity for transformation remain locked away as long as you continue to project them onto external figures. Allow this question to resonate within you like a tuning fork testing the truth of your inner landscape. Who is your idol, your object of admiration in the realm of deep inner work, self-knowledge, shadow integration? Perhaps a renowned psychologist, a spiritual mentor, or even a character from a book whose inner strength deeply moved you. And now, daring to face the truth. What are your own talents? What unrealized abilities? What dormant powers have you, perhaps unconsciously, given away to this person, thereby depriving yourself of direct access to them? This is not a call to deconstruct idols, but to demystify them. It is an invitation to reclaim what rightfully belongs to you, recognizing that the qualities you so value in others already exist within you, albeit in an embryonic state. They await your attention, your recognition, your permission to manifest. Awareness of this is only the first but crucial step. For to reclaim these treasures, to begin a dialogue with your wholeness, requires not only awareness, but also concrete actions, specific keys that open these inner gates. When we finally begin to see reflections of our own soul in the mirrors of the world, whether they are the repulsive images of the tyrant and the eternal victim, or the alluring faces of the sage and the fearless, a moment arrives when mere awareness is no longer enough. It's just the first breath before the dive. True alchemy begins when we decide not just to observe, but to speak with these phantoms, when we reach out through the shifting veil of projections to reclaim what has been exiled or alienated. This is not merely a psychotherapeutic technique. It is a philosophy of reclaiming one's power. We learn not to reject parts of ourselves that were once ridiculed or suppressed, nor to idolize those that seemed unattainable in others. We learn to perceive them as threads pulled from the unified fabric of our being, and now it is time to reweave them, enriching the pattern. Projection is not a condemnation, but an invitation to reclaim your own healthy rage when it is directed at protecting boundaries, your own vulnerability when it opens the path to compassion, your own wisdom when it leads to clarity, your own fearlessness when it paves the way for action. Every time we feel a strong attraction or aversion to someone, it is a cry from our soul, pointing to an unused resource, an unrevealed facet of our potential. How do you initiate this dialogue when the voice of the shadow feels alien or frightening, or when the golden shadow whispers of an unattainable ideal? We can begin with a simple yet profound exercise that creates a sacred space for encountering these inner exiles and unrevealed treasures. Find a secluded spot. Place 2 empty chairs facing each other. One chair represents you, with your current perspective, your fears, your preconceptions. The second chair represents the shadow itself, whether it's your inner critic, suppressed aggression, exiled vulnerability, or your golden shadow, the unrevealed artist, the hidden leader, the dormant sage. Sit in your chair. Take a deep breath. Imagine this part of you sitting in the second chair. It might be the image of someone you despise or admire, or simply a vague feeling. Begin to speak to it. Express your feelings. I'm afraid of you because you're so much like my father, who was a tyrant. Or, I envy you because you express emotions so easily, and I'm afraid of being weak. Don't hold back. Let the words flow. Then stand up and move to the shadow's chair. Now you are that part. Allow yourself to feel what it's like to be it. What would it say to you? What is its true purpose? Perhaps Aggression will say, yeah, I'm not here to destroy, but to protect your boundaries, which you constantly violate. Or vulnerability will reply, I am not weakness. I am the door to true intimacy and compassion. Perhaps the sage will say, Baba, I have always been within you, but you haven't listened. Respond honestly without censorship. Switch between the chairs, allowing the dialogue to unfold. Listen not only to the words, but also to the sensations they evoke. The goal is not to defeat the shadow or make it disappear, but to understand its message, its function, its place in your psyche. This is an act of deep acceptance and integration. With each switch, you will feel the boundaries between you and the shadow dissolve, opening the path to wholeness. You won't become a tyrant, but you will gain healthy assertiveness. You won't become a victim, but you will learn to embrace your vulnerability. You won't just admire others' wisdom, but you will begin to trust your own. This process is just one path leading to the unveiling of the true self. However, the path to wholeness is not limited to personal shadows and golden reflections. There are other more ancient and powerful forces dwelling in the depths of the collective unconscious that also shape our reality and our self-perception.